Counselor FRYNN had never heard a child laugh on Concord Station before. The sound bounced off the metal walls of the administration corridor like something that did not belong there. He stopped mid-step, all four of his arms frozen around the stack of diplomatic files he was carrying, and listened. It came again, high and bright and careless. The kind of sound that had no business existing on a station built for arguments between species who barely tolerated each other. He found the source 10 minutes later. A small human girl, no older than 7 by their counting, was sitting cross-legged on the floor outside docking bay 9. She had a thick book of blank pages open on her lap and colored sticks in her hands, and she was drawing something with intense concentration. Her dark hair fell across her face. Her shoes were untied. She looked like she had wandered away from wherever she was supposed to be and had simply decided that this spot was good enough. FRYNN learned her name was Lily Whitfield. Her father, Commander Dean Whitfield, had just been assigned as the new human military attaché on the station. Some arrangement had been made to allow the child aboard during his 6-month posting. It was unusual. Children were not forbidden on Concord Station, but no one ever brought them. The station was a place for politics and tension, not for small people with untied shoes. Over the next several days, FRYNN found himself watching Lily without meaning to. She moved through the station like a warm wind through a cold building. She drew pictures for the Palani clerks in the records office, and they pinned them to their walls. She waved at the tall, silent Morvani delegates every morning until one of them finally waved back. She asked a finale trader what his homeworld looked like, and when he described its red forests, she drew one for him from imagination. He kept it. FRYNN had read the human cultural files. He knew they were a death world species. He knew their planet was a nightmare of extreme weather, predators, and geological violence. He knew that their military, though young on the galactic stage, had already earned a reputation that made older species nervous. But watching Lily offer a color drawing to a species she had never seen before, it was hard to remember any of that. Commander Whitfield was a different kind of quiet. He was polite. He attended every meeting on time. He spoke only when spoken to and never raised his voice. But FRYNN noticed that other species moved out of his way in corridors without being asked. There was something behind the man's calm that FRYNN could not name, something heavy and still, like deep water that you could not see the bottom of. Then the Dravari arrived. Their delegation came aboard with noise and demand. They were tall, scaled, broad across the shoulders, and they walked like they expected everyone else to flatten against the walls. Ambassador Sala led them with a sharp smile and sharper words. She complained about the quarters. She complained about the food. She looked at the Palani staff like they were furniture and addressed the station council like she was doing them a favor by showing up. The Dravari controlled 3 major trade routes through the mid-rim territories, and everyone knew it. So no one pushed back. No one corrected them. The station bent around them the way it always did when a powerful delegation arrived. FRYNN kept his head down and processed their paperwork. But he noticed things. He noticed how the Dravari guards shoved past smaller species in the corridors. He noticed how they laughed too loud in the cantina and broke a Palani server's tray without apologizing. And he noticed Ron. Ron was young for a Dravari soldier. His scales were still smooth, and his eyes still had that restless hunger that older Dravari learned to hide. He stood behind Ambassador Sala during council sessions and scanned the room like he was looking for something to pick apart. Twice, FRYNN saw him watching Lily from across the hall. His expression was not curiosity. It was contempt. Among the Dravari, size meant authority. Strength meant right. A smaller being that did not show fear was not brave. It was broken, and Lily showed no fear of anything. She smiled at the Dravari guards the same way she smiled at everyone else, and FRYNN saw how that smile made Ron's jaw tighten every time. FRYNN thought about saying something to Commander Whitfield. He thought about mentioning that a Dravari guard seemed to be paying attention to his daughter, but he talked himself out of it. This was a diplomatic station. There were rules. There were cameras. There were consequences for misconduct. Surely no one, not even a Dravari, would bother a child on neutral ground. He told himself this and almost believed it that on the seventh day of the Dravari visit, Lily went to the garden deck after lunch. It was a wide, open section of the station filled with plants from dozens of worlds, meant to give delegates a place to breathe between sessions. Lily liked it there. She brought her sketchbook and sat on a stone bench near a cluster of glowing blue flowers from a world whose name she could not pronounce. She was alone. She opened her book and began to draw. At the far end of the corridor, a door slid open. 3 Dravari soldiers stepped through, talking among themselves. Ron was in the front. He stopped when he saw the girl sitting by herself on the bench. His 2 companions stopped behind him. One of them grinned. FRYNN was not there to see what happened next. He would spend a long time wishing he had been. Lily did not look up right away when the footsteps came closer. She was focused on getting the petals right. The blue flowers had 6 of them, each one curling slightly at the tip, and she wanted to capture that curl. She pressed her colored stick harder against the page and tilted her head. The shadow fell across her sketchbook. She looked up. Ron stood over her, close enough that she had to crane her neck all the way back to see his face. He was enormous from her angle. His scales caught the artificial light of the garden deck and turned them a dull bronze. His mouth was a thin, hard line. Behind him, the other 2 Dravari stood, watching, arms folded. "Hello," Lily said. She said it the same way she said it to everyone. Bright, open, without a single drop of fear in her voice. Because she was 7 years old and had not yet learned that some creatures in this galaxy saw kindness as weakness, that Ron's eyes narrowed. Among his people, a being this small should have pressed itself to the ground. It should have lowered its gaze and stayed silent until the larger one passed. That was order. That was the natural way. This tiny, soft thing sitting on a bench, looking up at him with wide, curious eyes and saying hello like they were equals, it offended something deep inside him that he spoke in broken common, the shared trade language of the station. Human children should not be here. His voice was a low rasp. This station is not for small, weak things. Lily blinked. "I'm not weak," she said. "I'm just little." "That's different." One of the soldiers behind Ron snorted a laugh. Ron did not laugh. His hand shot out and grabbed Lily by the arm, just above the elbow. His fingers, thick and scaled and rough, closed around her like a clamp. He lifted her straight off the bench. Her sketchbook tumbled from her lap and hit the floor, pages scattering. Her colored sticks rolled under the bench. Lily cried out. It was not a scream. It was a short, sharp sound of surprise and pain. Her feet dangled above the ground. Ron held her at his eye level and stared at her the way someone might stare at an insect caught between their fingers. "Small," he said. "Soft. Breakable." He shook her once, hard enough that her teeth clicked together. Then he dropped her. Lily hit the ground on her hands and knees. Her palms stung against the hard floor. Her arm throbbed where his grip had been. She stayed there for a moment, breathing fast, her hair hanging in her face. She did not cry. Not yet. But her chin trembled. Ron turned and walked away. His 2 companions followed, one of them chuckling. They left through the far door without looking back, as if nothing of any importance had just happened 20 meters away, hidden behind a row of potted ferns. A Palani maintenance worker named Drell had seen everything. He had been cleaning an air filter when the Dravari entered, and he had frozen in place the moment Ron approached the girl. His species was small. His species did not confront Dravari soldiers. His species hid and survived and reported problems through proper channels. But when the door closed behind the soldiers, Drell moved. He scurried to Lily's side, all 4 hands reaching for her, helping her sit up. He saw the bruise already forming on her arm. 5 distinct marks, each one the shape of a Dravari finger, pressed deep into her pale skin like a brand. "Are you hurt?" Drell asked, his voice high and tight. "Little one, are you hurt?" Lily looked at her arm. Her lower lip wobbled. "He was really mean," she whispered. Drell activated his communicator and called for help. He called medical. He called station security. And he called Commander Whitfield. Whitfield arrived in under 4 minutes. FRYNN would later learn that the man had been in a meeting on the other side of the station when the call came. He did not know how Whitfield had covered that distance so fast. Humans were not supposed to be that quick. The commander came through the garden deck doors at a pace that was not quite running, but was far beyond walking. His face was set. His eyes found his daughter immediately. He crossed the distance and dropped to one knee beside her. "Lily." His voice was steady. "Show me." She held out her arm. The bruise was ugly, dark, the shape of a hand that was not human. Whitfield looked at it for a long time. He touched the edge of it with his fingertips, so gently it was like he was afraid his own touch would add to her pain. Something changed in his face. FRYNN would hear about it later from Drell, who described it in a shaking voice. He said it was like watching a door close. One moment, Whitfield was a father, soft and worried and full of love. The next moment, all of that went somewhere deep inside, and what was left on the surface was something flat and cold and absolutely still. Whitfield picked up Lily and held her against his chest with one arm. She buried her face in his neck. With his free hand, he reached down and picked up her scattered sketchbook. He held it carefully, like it mattered. Then he looked at Drell. "Which species did this?" he asked. His voice was quiet, calm, almost polite. And Drell, who had survived 40 years on a station full of dangerous aliens, felt more afraid in that moment than he had ever felt in his life. "Dravari," Drell said, "a young soldier. His name is Ron." Whitfield nodded once. He said thank you. He carried his daughter out of the garden deck without another word. The corridor was silent after he left. Drell stood alone among the alien flowers and realized his hands were shaking. The formal grievance was filed before the station's night cycle began. FRYNN processed it himself. It was clean, precise, and written in perfect diplomatic language. Commander Whitfield had not used a single emotional word in the entire document. He described the assault on his daughter the way someone might describe a weather event. Time, location, parties involved, nature of the contact, resulting injury. Attached was a medical image of Lily's arm showing the bruise in sharp detail. 5 Dravari finger marks pressed deep into the skin of a 7-year-old girl. FRYNN flagged it as urgent and forwarded it to the station council. He expected a quick resolution. The evidence was clear. The witness, Drell, had already given his statement. This should have been simple. A disciplinary action against Ron, a formal note in the Dravari delegation's file, maybe a restricted movement order. Standard procedure. Done within a day that he was wrong. The council convened the following morning. It was a circular room with raised seats for each species delegation and a central floor where grievances were presented. FRYNN sat at his administrative desk to the side, recording everything. Commander Whitfield stood at the center. He wore his uniform pressed and perfect. His hands were clasped behind his back. His face showed nothing that he presented the facts in under 3 minutes. He did not raise his voice. He did not add commentary. He simply told the council what had happened to his daughter and requested that the responsible soldier be held accountable under station law. Then Ambassador Solis stood. She was tall, even for a Dravari. Her scales were a deep green, polished and gleaming under the council lights. She wore the formal robes of her rank, and she looked at Whitfield the way one might look at something stuck to the bottom of a shoe. "The Dravari delegation acknowledges that physical contact occurred," she said. Her comment was flawless, each word placed with care. "However, we reject the characterization of this event as an assault." The council chamber went quiet. Sala continued. She explained that among the Dravari, physical correction of lesser beings was a normal social interaction. It was how order was maintained. A larger being had the cultural right, to physically direct a smaller one. Ron had simply been enforcing a natural boundary. The human child had been in a semi-restricted area without supervision. The fault, Sala suggested, lay with the parent. FRYN watched Whitfield's face while Sala spoke. It did not change. Not once. Not even when she referred to Lily as a lesser being. Then Sala said the thing that would later be recorded in FRYN's personal file as the single worst diplomatic statement in the history of Concord Station. She looked directly at Whitfield and said, "We see no reason for this level of response. It was only a human child. They breed quickly enough." The chamber did not gasp. That was the worst part, FRYN thought later. No one gasped. A few delegates shifted in their seats. The Morvani representative closed his eyes briefly. The finale ambassador looked at her hands. But no one spoke. No one objected. Because the Dravari controlled 3 trade routes and 40% of the processed fuel supply in the Midrim, and that made them too important to correct. The council chair, an elderly Pelani named Voss, cleared his throat and suggested a compromise. Perhaps a written warning for the soldier. Perhaps a note of caution added to the Dravari file. Perhaps both parties could agree to keep their distance for the remaining duration of the visit. It was nothing. It was worse than nothing. It was the entire galactic community telling a father that his daughter's pain was less important than trade agreements. Whitfield listened to it all. When the session ended, he stood, nodded politely to the council, and left. No outburst, no threats, no slamming of hands on tables. He simply walked out the way he had walked in, calm and upright and silent. FRYN caught up with him in the corridor. He did not know why. He was not responsible for this. He was a clerk, but something about the stillness in Whitfield's walk made him feel like he needed to say something. "Commander," FRYN said, his voice small and careful. "I am sorry about the council's decision. I want you to know that I personally found the ambassador's words to be unacceptable." Whitfield stopped. He looked down at FRYN. For a moment, something flickered behind his eyes, something warm and tired and terribly sad. Then it was gone. "Thank you, counselor," he said. "That means something." He walked away. FRYN watched him go and felt a cold, knot forming in his stomach. He had seen angry beings before. He had seen furious delegates throw chairs and scream and make threats that shook the walls. He knew how to handle anger. He did not know how to handle whatever this was. That evening, station communication logs would later show that Commander Dean Whitfield sent a single encrypted transmission from his private quarters. It was short. It was directed to a military channel that FRYN did not have clearance to access. Attached to the message was a high-resolution image of the bruise on a 7-year-old girl's arm, 5 dark finger marks on pale skin. The text of the message was 4 words long. "They touched my daughter." Within an hour, 14 different human military channels flagged active. FRYN would not learn this until later. But somewhere out in the dark between the stars, something very large and very quiet had begun to move. 3 days passed, and nothing happened. That was what the Dravari believed. That was what most of the station believed. The complaint had been filed, the council had offered its weak compromise, and the humans had gone quiet. Ambassador Sala took this as proof that she had been right. Humans were soft. They made noise, and then they folded. Ron was even less subtle about it. He was seen in the station cantina telling the story of how he had grabbed the little human and shaken her like a doll. He acted it out for his fellow soldiers, lifting an invisible child by the arm, and they laughed. He said the father had done nothing. He said humans were cowards who hid behind paperwork. FRYN heard this secondhand and felt sick. He had tried twice to speak with Commander Whitfield since the council session, but the man had been polite and brief both times. Lily had not been seen outside their quarters. The drawings she had given the Pelani clerks were still pinned to their walls, but no new ones appeared on the morning of the 3rd day. FRYN was on duty in the operations center when the long-range sensors triggered an alert. He looked at the readings and did not understand them at first. There were ships incoming, multiple contacts, moving fast and in tight formation. Identify, said the operations chief, a Pelani named Goss. The computer identified them. 12 human warships, 4 heavy cruisers, 6 destroyers, 2 support vessels, and, at the center of the formation, a single massive carrier. The Resolute, flagship of Admiral Harlow, commander of the human 7th Fleet. The operations center went silent. Every screen showed the same thing. 12 warships dropping out of faster-than-light travel in perfect synchronization, spreading into a formation that wrapped around Concord Station like a fist closing around a stone. Goss turned to FRYN. His compound eyes were wide. Did anyone request a human military escort? FRYN shook his head. The broadcast came 60 seconds later. It was audio only. A woman's voice, calm and measured, with the kind of authority that did not need volume to make itself felt. This is Admiral Harlow of the Human Defense Fleet, addressing Concord Station and all delegations present. 3 days ago, a human child and protected citizen was physically assaulted on neutral ground by a member of the Dravari military delegation. A formal grievance was filed. The offending party has refused accountability. The station council has failed to enforce its own laws. She paused. The silence on the operations center was absolute. I am formally requesting the immediate surrender of the Dravari soldier, known as Ron, to human custody. I am further requesting a public apology from the Dravari delegation, delivered before the full station council. You have 6 hours to comply. The broadcast ended. No threats, no ultimatums beyond the deadline. Just a statement of facts and a request that sounded like a door being bolted shut. The station erupted. Sala stormed into the council chamber and demanded an emergency session. She called the human action an act of war. She called it piracy. She called it a violation of every treaty the humans had ever signed. She pointed at the sensor displays showing 12 warships holding position around the station and declared that the Dravari would not be bullied by a species that had only been in space for 2 centuries. Then she sent a distress call to the Dravari fleet. FRYN processed the emergency communications with shaking hands. He watched delegates rush through corridors. He watched the Morvani delegation quietly relocate to the inner sections of the station, far from the outer hull. He watched the finale ambassador pack a bag. And he watched the humans. That was what stayed with him. Every human on the station, all 9 of them, carried on as if nothing unusual was happening. A human engineer continued repairing a water recycler on Deck 4. 2 human aides walked to the cafeteria and ate lunch. Commander Whitfield attended a previously scheduled briefing and took notes. None of them looked surprised. None of them looked nervous. They all had the same face. That same flat, calm, still expression that Whitfield had worn when he saw the bruise on his daughter's arm. Like a mask made of patience. Like people who had already decided what was going to happen and were simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. FRYN found Whitfield in the corridor after the briefing. The commander was walking back toward his quarters, datapad under his arm. "Commander," FRYN said, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Did you know this was coming?" Whitfield looked at him. There was no guilt in his expression. No triumph. Just that deep, still calm. "Counselor," he said quietly, "I sent a message. I told them what happened. Everything after that was their decision." "Their decision," FRYN repeated. "Yes." Whitfield paused. "I did not ask for a fleet. I sent them a picture of my daughter's arm. The fleet was their answer." He nodded politely and walked away. FRYN stood in the empty corridor and felt the station hum around him. 12 warships holding position outside, a Dravari fleet racing toward them from the mid-rim, and a 7-year-old girl somewhere behind a closed door with a bruise on her arm that had set all of it in motion, that he understood now. The humans had not come to negotiate. They had not come to argue or posture or trade threats across a council table. They had come to deliver a consequence. And consequences, FRYNN was beginning to learn, were the only language humans truly spoke. The Dravari fleet arrived 9 hours after Solace sent her distress call, 3 hours past Admiral Harlow's deadline. 30 warships, heavy cruisers with plated hulls and forward-mounted plasma batteries. Attack frigates built for speed and aggression. A command dreadnought at the center, bristling with enough firepower to crack a small moon .30 against 12. Sala watched the sensor display in the council chamber and smiled for the first time in days. She turned to the assembled delegates and spread her arms. "Now," she said, "we will see how brave the humans are." FRYNN was in the operations center when the Dravari fleet took up an attack formation around the human ships. He watched the numbers on his screen and tried to do the math. The Dravari had more ships, more guns, more tonnage. Every military calculation he could think of said the humans were outmatched. He waited for Harlow to withdraw. He waited for a new negotiation, a revised demand, something that looked like backing down. Instead, Harlow broadcast again. Same voice, same calm. "Dravari fleet, this is Admiral Harlow. Our terms remain unchanged. Surrender the soldier. Issue the apology. You now have 1 hour." The Dravari commander responded with a weapons lock on the Resolute. What happened next took 41 minutes. FRYNN watched every second of it on the operations display, and for the rest of his life, he would describe it as the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. The human ships did not charge. They did not form a line and trade, fire the way Dravari military doctrine expected. Instead, they moved. All 12 ships broke formation at once and scattered outward in a pattern that looked like chaos, but was not chaos at all. It was coordinated. Every ship knew exactly where every other ship was going. They wove between the Dravari vessels like water flowing through cracks in a wall. The Dravari opened fire. Their plasma batteries lit up the void around the station in sheets of blue and white. They hit nothing. The human ships were not where the shots landed. They had already moved. They turned and twisted and cut angles that should not have been possible for vessels their size, and they struck back with surgical precision. They did not aim to kill. That was the part that broke something in the Dravari fleet's confidence. The human weapons targeted engines, weapons systems, communication arrays, shield generators. Each strike was exact. Each one disabled a specific system on a specific ship. No hui breaches, no decompresión, no casualties. The humans were not trying to destroy the Dravari fleet. They were taking it apart piece by piece, the way a parent might take a dangerous toy away from a child. Firmly, carefully, without negotiation. FRYNN watched a human destroyer roll under the belly of a Dravari cruiser 3 times its size and fire a single precise shot that killed its main engine. The cruiser drifted, dark and silent. The destroyer was already gone, sliding behind another target, firing again one by one. The Dravari ships went dark. Engines dead, weapons offline, communications cut. They hung in space like scattered wreckage, except they were intact. Every crew member alive, every hull unbroken. Just powerless that in the operations center, Goss stared at the display with his mouth open. FRYNN could not speak at all. He had seen battles in simulation. He had read reports of fleet engagements between species that had been fighting wars for thousands of years. He had never seen anything like this. The humans had not just won. They had won without killing a single enemy. And somehow that was worse than 41 minutes. 30 Dravari warships, silenced. Harlow broadcast a third time. Her voice had not changed. Not a trace of excitement or satisfaction. "Dravari fleet, your vessels have been disabled. Life support remains active on all ships. Rescue and repair crews will be permitted to operate freely once our terms are met." She paused. "Surrender the soldier designated Ron to human custody. Issue a formal public apology before the Concord Station Council. Additionally, the Dravari government will formally recognize human children as protected persons under galactic law. Any future act of harm against a human child by a Dravari citizen will be considered an act of war against the human species. She paused again. You have 1 hour. In the council chamber, FRYN watched Ambassador Sala's face. The smile was gone. The confidence was gone. What replaced it was something FRYN had never expected to see on a Dravari. She looked small. She looked like someone who had just realized that the rules she had lived by her entire life did not apply here. The Dravari Command Dreadnought, the only ship still partially functional, sent a single short transmission to the station. It was a surrender code. Unconditional. Sala closed her eyes. On the station, Dravari soldiers moved through the corridors in silence. They were not shouting anymore. They were not laughing. They walked with their heads down and their hands visible. And when they reached Ron's quarters, they did not knock. They opened the door, took him by the arms, and escorted him to the station brig. FRYN saw Ron as they brought him past the operations center. The young soldier's scales had gone pale. His eyes were wide. He looked at the humans standing in the corridor as he passed. And for the first time, he looked exactly the way a smaller being was supposed to look in Dravari culture, that he looked afraid. Every seat in the central hall was taken. Delegates from 11 species filled the curved rows of the gallery. The Morvani sat tall and silent. The finale clustered together in nervous groups. The Palani staff lined the walls, data pads in hand, recording everything. Even species that had no business on Concord Station had sent observers. Word had traveled fast. When humans brought a fleet to answer for a bruise on a child's arm, people paid attention. The hall was built for ceremonies. High ceilings, polished floors, a raised platform at the center where speakers stood when formal declarations were made. Today, it had been arranged for something that had never happened on the station before. A forced public apology from a major galactic power. Ambassador Sala stood on the platform. She was alone. No guard behind her. No aides at her side. Her green scales looked dull under the hall lights, as though even her body had lost its shine. She held a single sheet of written text in both hands, and FRYN noticed from his seat near the back that the sheet was trembling. Commander Whitfield stood at the edge of the platform. Lily was beside him. She held his hand with her right. Her left arm still wore a thin bandage where the bruise was healing. She looked very small, standing next to her father in that enormous hall, surrounded by aliens that towered above her. But she was not hiding. She was not crying. She stood straight and looked at the room with the same open eyes she had always had. Sala began to read. On behalf of the Dravari sovereignty, I formally acknowledge that the soldier designated Ron committed an unprovoked act of physical aggression against a human child on neutral diplomatic ground. Her voice was flat. Each word came out like it cost her something. This act was a violation of station law and a failure of Dravari command responsibility. The Dravari sovereignty accepts full accountability. She paused, swallowed. We offer our formal and unconditional apology to Commander Dean Whitfield and to his daughter, Lily Whitfield, for the harm caused. We further recognize, as of this day, that all human children are classified as protected persons under galactic law. Any act of harm committed against a human child by a Dravari citizen will be treated as a direct act of aggression against the human species. She lowered the paper. Her hands were still shaking. She did not look at Whitfield. She did not look at Lily. She looked at the floor. The hall was silent. Not the silence of respect, but the silence of a room full of beings who had just watched the balance of the galaxy shift under their feet. FRYN expected Whitfield to respond. He expected a speech. Umans lubas pakas. He had read that in their cultural files. But Whitfield said nothing. He just stood there, one hand holding his daughter's, the other hanging at his side, and waited. Then Lily tugged his sleeve. She whispered something. FRYN was too far away to hear it, but he saw Whitfield look down at her. Something moved across the commander's face. something that cracked the calm mask he had worn for over a week. His eyes softened. The hard line of his mouth loosened. For just a moment, he was not a military officer or a diplomatic attaché or a man who had called a fleet to his side. He was just a father, looking at his daughter, surprised by whatever she had said. He knelt beside her. He listened. He nodded. Lily let go of his hand and walked forward. Alone, across the open floor of the central hall, past the rows of alien delegates, toward the platform where Ambassador Sala stood. Her footsteps were the only sound in the room. Every eye followed her. She stopped in front of Sala. The Dravari ambassador was nearly 3 times her height. Lily had to look almost straight up to see her face. She reached into the pocket of her jacket and pulled out a piece of paper. It was folded twice. She unfolded it carefully, the way children do when they are proud of something and wanted to look right. Then she held it up with both hands. It was a drawing. Colored sticks on white paper. 2 figures standing side by side under a bright yellow sun. One was small and round with dark hair. The other was tall and green with scales. Both of them were smiling. "I drew this for you," Lily said. Her voice was clear and carried through the silent hall. "So you remember that we can be friends if you want." Sala stared at the drawing. Her mouth opened slightly. Her hands, which had held the apology with such stiff formality, now reached out slowly and took the paper from the girl. She held it the way someone might hold something fragile and unexpected, like she did not know what to do with it. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then Sala's jaw tightened. She blinked. She looked away from the drawing and up at the ceiling, and FRYNN realized with a shock that the ambassador was trying not to cry. Lily waited. When Sala looked back down at her, the girl smiled. "It's okay," Lily said. "You can keep it." Sala nodded once. She could not speak. She folded the drawing with great care and held it against her chest. Lily turned and walked back to her father. Whitfield scooped her up and held her against his shoulder. She rested her head on his neck and closed her eyes, and just like that, she was done with the whole thing. FRYNN sat in the back row and did not move for a long time after the hall emptied. He thought about warships and weapons and fleets that could disable 30 vessels in 40 minutes. He thought about a father who had shaken the galaxy with 4 words. He thought about a species that had clawed its way off a death world and built ships that made the stars nervous. And he thought about a little girl who, after everything that had been done to her, walked up to the being whose people had hurt her and offered a drawing of friendship. That was it. That was the thing that made humans the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Not their ships, not their soldiers, not the cold, coordinated fury of their response. It was this. After the war was over, after the price was paid, after every consequence had been delivered, a human child still walked forward with kindness in her hands. FRYNN returned to his office that evening. He opened his cultural database and found his file on humans. The old entry read, adaptable, persistent, dangerous when provoked. He deleted it. He sat for a while, thinking. Then he typed a single line and saved the file. Do not touch their children.